So this is the Razer Wolverine V2 Chroma. I've said it before, but I genuinely feel like this is the best D-pad I have ever used on a controller. I genuinely feel that way. And I've used quite a few controllers. I've used the Razer Rayon controller. I feel like this D-pad is not that great, and a lot of people have said that they can't do half circles on this. Personally, my model didn't have that issue, so I'm fortunate on that. But whenever I compare that D-pad to this D-pad, it's just a night and day difference. And I've also used the Hori Fighting Commander, I've used the Nintendo Switch Pro controller, and I've used the Xbox One X controller, PS4 regular controller, just the default DS4 controller. I've used other controllers, such as, like third-party Xbox controllers and things like that, and I've used a whole bunch of controllers over a time, and on fighting games and stuff, just seeing which one sort of fits me best, and this is just the one. I mean, it really is the one that I feel like has performed the best out of all of them in terms of the D-pad and most features about this controller. So I just want to say that this is not sponsored. I had to personally buy this controller, from, I had my own pocket and everything, and I got this controller for $150. That's a lot of money. That is a whole lot of money, and you can get it cheaper for like $130, and maybe there's sales and things you can get it cheaper than that, but I personally had to pay that much. See, this controller right here, this Razer Rayon, it's only meant for fighting games, and it's $100. And you can get it cheaper online on eBay. I got this one for $20, man. I ain't gonna pay $100 for that, but I personally wouldn't feel like that controller is remotely worth it. But this one, the Razer Wolverine V2 Chroma, I know it's a mouthful, but I personally feel like this controller is worth it, because I have never had a controller that I can feel like I can do every motion that I want. In terms of a good D-pad, what I feel like really makes this one stand out is the fact that I can do every motion I want and never feel like it's some sort of weird issue with the controller. I've used quite a few controllers, and I can say firsthand with the Razer Rayon, I would show on Guilty right here, but you can't use multiple controllers at once. But I have personally used this controller a lot, and there's just issues with it sometimes. Just whenever doing perfect half circles, I can say that sometimes the down input won't come out, and in games like KOF, that's a big problem. It won't do the motion because of that. So once I got this controller, I was suddenly able to do half circles much more consistently because that down issue wasn't really happening. And if it was just because I was messing up the input. It wasn't because of the controller. So as long as I'm deliberate and do everything that I want, like do every part of the motion that I want, then my inputs come out. And I just feel like that's such a nice feeling. Just being able to have a controller that I feel like I never have any issue with, other than me messing up the execution. As long as my execution is on point, I feel like I can do pretty much any motion that I want. And that's pretty huge to me. I feel like if you're going to, buy a controller, then I feel like it should do everything you want. And so far, I've never had any issues with this controller that has that happen. Any sort of execution problems or anything of that nature. So, moving on to things that I don't like about this controller, because I'll get back to some things I like about this controller. I don't want to make it seem like it's only positives. Well, one thing I don't really like about this controller is the buttons. I feel like the buttons are pretty good. They are mechanical switches, technically, but they're more of a mouse switch. There's something more adjacent to, a mouse's clicking. Like it's how you press it down, it has that feeling. Which, sounds pretty good, but in practice sometimes it doesn't allow you to mash super fast. You can see that it's kind of hard to mash out because the actuation doesn't fully come up fast enough sometimes. And that could be an issue if you're mashing really, really fast. So if you plan on using this controller for things where you have to mash extremely fast, I don't recommend using the space buttons for that purpose. Instead, I would say use the macros on the back because you can mash much faster because of the switches. And all of these switches right here, the additional switches right here, are mechanical. These face buttons are mechanical. The D-pad is mechanical. And these other ones, you know, the bumpers, they're like semi, not quite, but you know, they're all pretty good, but they're just not as good as something like the Razer Rayon's mechanical switches, because these are actually mechanical switches from a keyboard. These are Razer yellow switches underneath this, which I personally really like, and that's why I don't really like these switches as much, because I was so used to using these, and the actuation and the speed that you can actuate these switches is so incredibly fast, because I'm so used to mechanical switches on a keyboard, such as this one. You know, these are Cherry Mix Browns, and of course they're a little bit different. I've used Cherry Mix Reds for a long time though, so the linear switch and everything was really, you know, familiar to me, and I can actuate super fast. So that's one drawback that I feel like this controller does need a little bit more assistance with. Like if you want to, you have to sort of work with it. That's what I'm trying to get at. Like if you want to use these certain combos and stuff, as long as you're just trying to go for the combos and not trying to, you know, mash like super fast, then I feel like these switches are more than adequate. I would say they're better than any other controllers switches I've used in terms of, you know, the PS4 controllers, everything like that, you know, Xbox controllers. They're better. That's the only thing that I have to gripe about, because how much this controller cost. I wish they put a little bit more effort into these mechanical face buttons, just so that way, you know, I can mash faster. That's really all it is. It's no big issue. As long as you're using the controller normally, then this is not a factor really at all. So one thing I want to point out that I do like about these real quick, that could be potentially a con if you didn't know this, is these switches. They lock and unlock the right trigger and left triggers. So you can actually push down all the way with it unlocked, and if you have it locked, it only goes partial and still fully activates the switch. So that could be a big problem. Like whenever I first bought it, I didn't know that it was a part of the feature, so I just didn't know that I could press this. I thought I had to press this down all the way, and I didn't really like that because I was so familiar with this controller, the Razer Rayon. You can see that this one just basically doesn't even like, you can't even see it really. It's so low, like it doesn't even look like I'm actuating it right now, but it's fully actuated right there. So I was so used to that, and also other controllers had lower profile triggers, and that's a big thing that I feel like this controller, you know, would have been a big problem if I didn't know about that. But since I can do that, I feel like it made it a lot better using the analog switches. So that's a plus. But another thing that I would say is a con is that a really big con at that for fighting game players is there is no native support for PlayStation. So if you plan on using this on a console like a PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5, you can't do that without some sort of adapter. And because of the cost of this controller, this costed me $150, you know, and that's a lot. I mean, you can get it for $130 or so. Of course, you have to pay tax and things. You might find it on sale, but it's still a lot of money to add on top of that. You know, at that point, it may be more worth, if you're truly wanting to find something for fighting games, I would say maybe a hitbox or a mixbox at that point, instead of having to pay that much money for this. But I feel like if you want a controller that really performs everything you want, this is the only one that I've used that I can find that really performs well, especially in the fact that you can use it for other things. And these switches are really good. I can actually do combos with these analog sticks. Like, look at this. I can do half circles. I can do quarter circles. As long as I'm a little bit more deliberate. make sure I get it, nice and well here. There we go. But yeah, I can get half circles, quarter circles, no problem. And that's something I can't really say about other controllers. I've used a Switch Pro controller for hundreds of hours on Smash, and I've never had that level of control, I feel, with it. It just feels so much better to use. And even whenever I play characters I don't really know, I feel like the execution of this controller really helps me out to make sure I can articulate my motions. If as long as I'm deliberate, these motions will come out, and that's really great. Like, look at this. The fact that I can do a Behemoth Typhoon, without even practicing, this is crazy. Before, I had significant trouble with this. I mean, I've played a lot more fighting games since I've originally, started using other controllers and stuff. I played with this controller for quite a few hours at this point, and I'm just making up combos here, but I could do them. Like, it's crazy the fact that I can do these inputs. Like, even though I've just never really messed around with this, but because this controller is just so damn good at execution, I can do these inputs. Even on the control stick, I can do these inputs. So I don't want to make it just sound like this is only all positives, but of this controller, because I definitely do feel like these buttons are a bit of an issue, and also the fact that it is only PC and Xbox exclusive without any adapter. I feel like that could be a big issue. But I just feel like there's so many positives to this controller that it's really hard not to recommend it. And there's just too many positive things about it. You can see right here I mapped these buttons to start and select, because there's not much use otherwise, I feel like, for these macros, because it only allows you to map buttons that are already on the controller, such as the face buttons, these analog switches, or right bumpers, or these press-ins. So they're not really that useful to me for anything, but for other games it could definitely come in use. Potentially, if you have to hold something, like holding a reticle or something, then that could be useful. If you don't feel like using this, if you want to only use for your aim or whatever, and you can actually change the sensitivity of these sticks and everything. So it definitely makes it a lot easier to work around, because maybe some games that don't have it, older games, older titles, and this will allow it. But another cool thing is that this is USB-C. You don't really see that too often. You see that USB-C. It's also braided, which is pretty huge to me. That was actually something that made me feel a little better about it whenever I unboxed it, was that, man, it comes with a braided USB at least, and it's a damn good one at that. And I just feel like the RGB as well, that's something I never thought would be on a controller. I didn't really think about, at least, and it's just a really cool feature to have. It could be distracting, but you can turn it off, fortunately. So I feel like that's just nice to have, just how this controller does everything, and even has additional things. And it does have a bit of a problem with these buttons, but they're not bad. They're not bad at all. In fact, they're better than the vast majority of controllers. It's just that I was, so fortunate to use other controllers, such as the Razer Rayon, that have these linear switches, these actual mechanical switches from a keyboard that just actuate so fast that it's just hard to really compare. Really, it's just they're just different, and they're different switches, and I've got acclimated to them. So that's why I wish those switches were on this controller, and if it was, I feel like this genuinely would be the perfect controller, especially if they had it for PlayStation support, because most fighting games are played on console at tournaments and stuff, so this one will not be usable without an adapter. And as I've said before, because of the cost of it, then I don't feel like it's worth it if you're serious, if you want to put more money, or put roughly the same amount of money, even, especially if you buy the adapter, into a Mixbox or a Hitbox. It'd probably be better suited for that. But if you're serious about using a pad, then this one I feel like is genuinely the best one I've found. that I've used. It's extremely good. Now, one thing that I feel like makes this a little bit more justified of a purchase is the fact that it has, you know, sticks. This is a huge thing. The fact that this has this good of a D-pad, you know, better than the Razer Rayons, which, I mean, some people have said it's quite bad, but I personally have found it to be good with my model and everything. But the fact that it has, you know, a really good D-pad, you know, better than the Razer Rayon, better than the Hori Fighter, better than all these dedicated fight pads specifically made for this purpose. It's just amazing, outstanding. And then you have these incredible control sticks that I've never had control sticks that are this precise. It's incredible. And there's even things you can change on them. You can change the height of the stick and everything. It's just amazing to me that, you know, these exist. The fact that, you know, you can do this, you know, have both of these functionalities, all of these buttons, all this, you know, all built into one controller. It's crazy to think that, you know, just put the best stuff on one controller and then sell that instead of having to buy two controllers like most of the time you have to do. You know, whenever you compare a Xbox controller and most controllers, then the D-pad historically on the Xbox 360 was quite bad. So a lot of people bought other controllers so that way they could play fighting games. And I mean, with the Xbox One's original one, there's a lot of people that did that as well. But the new Xbox One X, I feel like, is a little bit better. But as I said, there's half circles. You know, they come in some they're quite the detriment sometimes, where they don't quite, you know, come out quite the way you want. And this controller has the ability to do all of these things without fail, really. I feel like, you know, as long as your execution is on point, this controller won't fail you, and that's great. I just feel like if you're thinking about having to buy two controllers, you know, such as a fight stick and a regular controller just for normal games, I would say get this one. If you're comfortable with pad already, just buy this controller or something similar to it. Like, you know, maybe they'll release a new one soon that might be better or something of that sort. Then I would say just go for this, because having an all-in-one package is just, it's just such a great feeling. It really has made me want to play fighting games so much more. I look at this controller and I think, damn, you know, I'm glad that I have a controller that I feel like I can do my inputs. Even on new characters and stuff, I can just learn them so much faster than before. You know, mainly because, you know, I put more hours into the game because I got this controller, but also the fact that I can just do these inputs on command pretty much always. As long as I am deliberate with it and actually do the motion, it comes out. That's just awesome to have. But yeah, I would say I justify the purchase. I think it's worth it. If you can find it on sale, definitely buy it. Definitely buy it if you're serious about trying to get a controller that can play fighting games, and especially one that can do both. It's just crazy how good that is to feeling. Not to have two controllers plugged in at all times just to play fighting games and then one to play other games. That's incredible. It sounds kind of silly to say, but it really does make a difference in terms of my motivation to play stuff, because I've, you know, tried to use controller on games that I only play PC and mouse, like, you know, control, you know, mouse and keyboard, and I've been wanting to play the controller because I'm like, man, this controller is just good, and I'm not even sponsored. Like, this is just out of my own pocket. I had to go to GameStop and buy this shit, and I'm still, you know, wanting to make, you know, like a 20-minute video just ranting about it. You know, it's not necessarily the greatest review or whatever. I'm not, you know, going super in depth about every functionality and stuff, but I just wanted to make this to show just how good this controller is. Like, just to tell you, like, I genuinely think that if you're gonna get a controller, buy this one. I really do feel like that. If you want to use you know, if you want to play on PlayStation and stuff like that, and you don't have the access to PC, then I would say maybe not, just because it doesn't have native support. The cost that it incurs is quite a bit. But Otherwise, buy this controller. Just, it's great.